In this episode, we look at two areas that may seem separate at first: email security and operating system security. They fit together because both are about enforcing trust in places where attackers often try to blend in. Email is still one of the most common paths for phishing, impersonation, malware delivery, and fraud. Operating systems are where users sign in, policies are applied, applications run, and security settings either hold firm or quietly drift. On the email side, you will hear about domain-based message authentication reporting and conformance, DMARC, sender policy framework, SPF, domain keys identified mail, DKIM, and brand indicators for message identification, BIMI. On the operating system side, you will hear about group policy and security-enhanced Linux, SELinux. These controls are different, but they share a common purpose: helping organizations prove what is trusted and enforce what is allowed. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at CyberAuthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Email authentication matters because email was not originally designed with strong identity verification built in. A message can appear to come from a familiar organization, executive, vendor, bank, school, or coworker even when it was sent by someone else. Attackers abuse that weakness through spoofing, phishing, business email compromise, fake invoices, password theft, and malware delivery. When a message looks familiar, people are more likely to trust it. That is why email security cannot depend only on training users to spot suspicious messages. Training helps, but technical controls are needed too. Email authentication controls help receiving mail systems decide whether a message claiming to come from a domain is likely legitimate. They do not make every email safe, and they do not prove that the message content is honest. They help answer a narrower but very important question: is this sender authorized to send mail for this domain? SPF is an email authentication method that allows a domain owner to publish which mail servers are authorized to send email for that domain. The domain publishes this information in a domain name system, DNS, record. When a receiving mail server gets a message, it can check whether the sending server is listed as allowed for that domain. If the message came from an unauthorized source, the receiver can treat it as suspicious. You can picture SPF as a list of approved outgoing mail sources. If an organization uses a cloud email provider, a marketing platform, and a ticketing system to send mail, the SPF record should reflect those approved senders. The limitation is that SPF checks the sending path, not the full message content. It also has forwarding challenges, because forwarded mail may appear to come from an intermediate server that was not originally authorized. DKIM adds a different kind of protection by using a digital signature attached to the email. The sending mail system signs parts of the message using a private key. The receiving mail system can use a public key published in DNS to verify that signature. If the signature verifies, the receiver has evidence that the message was associated with the sending domain and that signed parts of the message were not changed after signing. This helps with integrity and domain authentication. You can think of DKIM as a tamper-evident seal for email. It does not guarantee that the message is wanted, harmless, or truthful, but it helps show that the message was signed by an authorized domain system and was not modified in certain protected areas during transit. DKIM is especially helpful because it can survive some forwarding situations better than SPF, depending on how the message is handled. DMARC builds on SPF and DKIM by giving domain owners a way to tell receiving mail systems what to do when authentication fails. DMARC also introduces alignment, which means the authenticated domain should match or align with the domain visible to the recipient in the messages from field. This matters because attackers may pass one technical check using a different domain while still showing the victim a familiar-looking brand domain. With DMARC, a domain owner can publish a policy that says to monitor, quarantine, or reject messages that fail the expected checks. A monitor policy lets the organization collect reports and understand who is sending mail for the domain. A quarantine policy asks receivers to treat failed messages as suspicious often sending them to spam. A reject policy asks receivers to block failed messages. DMARC turns authentication results into domain-level enforcement. DMARC reporting is valuable because many organizations do not fully know every system sending email on their behalf. A company may have corporate email, automated billing messages, marketing platforms, support tools, survey systems, human resources platforms, and security notification services. Some may be legitimate, and some may be old, misconfigured, or forgotten. If an organization jumps straight to strict rejection without understanding those sources, it may block its own valid messages. That is why DMARC is often deployed carefully. The organization may start by monitoring reports, identifying legitimate senders, fixing SPF and DKIM alignment, and then gradually moving towards stronger enforcement. The security goal is to make domain spoofing harder while preserving legitimate mail flow. For Security Plus, remember that DMARC is the policy and reporting layer that uses SPF and DKIM results to guide receiver action. BIMI is related to email trust and brand visibility, but it is not the same as SPF, DKIM, or DMARC. BIMI allows an organization's approved brand logo to appear with authenticated emails in participating mail clients. This can help recipients recognize legitimate brand messages more easily. However, BIMI depends on strong underlying email authentication, especially DMARC enforcement. The idea is that a brand should not get visual trust indicators unless it has done the technical work to protect its domain from spoofing. BIMI is not mainly an anti-malware control, and it does not prove that every message is safe. It is a trust signal built on top of other controls. You can think of it as a visible brand indicator that works only when the message passes the required authentication and policy conditions. These four email controls work best together because they answer different parts of the trust question. SPF asks whether the sending mail server is authorized for the domain. DKIM asks whether the message has a valid domain signature and whether signed content stayed intact. DMARC asks whether authentication aligns with the visible sender domain and what the receiver should do when checks fail. BIMI asks whether a validated brand indicator can be displayed after strong authentication is in place. None of these controls replaces safe user behavior, attachment scanning, link protection, malware filtering, or account security. A perfectly authenticated email can still contain a bad attachment if a real account or trusted sending platform is compromised. These controls are primarily about reducing spoofing and impersonation. They help receivers separate authorized domain use from messages pretending to be from that domain. Email security also depends on careful operations. SPF records can become too broad if administrators add more senders than necessary. DKIM keys must be protected and rotated when needed. DMARC reports must be reviewed so the organization can identify legitimate senders, broken mail flows, and spoofing attempts. BIMI requires brand and certificate considerations that must match the organization's readiness. Misconfiguration can cause real business problems, such as invoices, password reset messages, customer notifications, or support replies being rejected or sent to spam. That is why email authentication should be treated as an operational program, not a one-time record change. The organization should document who is allowed to send mail, remove old services, monitor failures, and coordinate changes when vendors or platforms are added. Strong email authentication is both a security control and an ongoing maintenance responsibility. Group policy is a Microsoft Windows feature used to centrally manage settings for users and computers in an Active Directory environment. Instead of configuring every computer manually, administrators can use group policy to enforce security and configuration settings across many systems. Group policy can control password requirements, account lockout settings, screen lock behavior, firewall settings, software restrictions, map drives, scripts, update settings, audit settings, and many other options. The security value is consistency. If every workstation is configured by hand, some will be missed, some will drift, and some will be configured incorrectly. Group policy allows an organization to define expected settings and apply them through a structured management system. It can also target settings based on groups organizational units, or computer roles. For Security Plus, understand group policy as centralized Windows configuration enforcement that helps reduce inconsistent and insecure settings. Group policy can also support hardening because it helps enforce secure baselines. A secure baseline is a set of approved configuration settings that reflect the organization's security expectations. For example, a baseline may require local firewalls to be enabled, guest accounts to be disabled, audit logging to be turned on, removable media restrictions to be applied, and account policies to follow defined standards. Without central enforcement, systems may drift as users install software, administrators make exceptions, or troubleshooting changes are never reversed. Group policy helps bring systems back toward the expected state. It is not perfect, and it must be designed carefully. A bad policy can cause widespread disruption because it may apply to many systems at once. Good change control, testing, documentation, and staged rollout matter. The strength of group policy is broad, repeatable control. The risk is that mistakes can also become broad and repeatable. SELinux is a Linux security feature that provides mandatory access control. That means it can enforce security rules about what processes and users are allowed to do, even when normal Linux permissions might otherwise allow an action. Traditional permissions often focus on file owners, groups, and read, write, or execute rights. SELinux adds another layer by applying security labels and policies to control interactions between processes, files, ports, and other resources. This helps limit the damage if a service is compromised. For example, a web server process may be allowed to read web content, but not access unrelated system files. Even if an attacker finds a weakness in that web service, SELinux policy can help contain what the compromised process is allowed to reach. The main idea is confinement. A process should do only what its security policy permits. SELinux can be powerful, but it can also feel challenging because it enforces rules that are not always obvious to someone expecting only traditional file permissions. A file may appear to have the right owner and permission bits, yet access may still be denied because the SELinux context is wrong. That can frustrate administrators who do not understand the additional layer. From a security perspective, that extra enforcement is the point. It helps prevent services from doing things outside their defined role. SELinux can run in enforcing mode, where policy violations are blocked. It can also run in permissive mode, where violations are logged but not blocked, which can help with troubleshooting and policy tuning. For the exam, focus on the concept rather than deep administration. SELinux strengthens Linux systems by enforcing mandatory access control and limiting process behavior. Group policy and SELinux both enforce operating system security, but they do it in different ecosystems and different ways. Group policy is associated with centralized Windows administration and configuration management. It helps administrators push consistent settings to users and computers across an organization. SELinux is associated with Linux mandatory access control and process confinement. It helps limit what services and processes can do, even when other permissions may seem to allow access. One is more about central policy distribution across managed Windows systems. The other is more about deep access enforcement inside Linux systems. Both reduce risk by making security settings less dependent on individual user choices. Both also require planning, testing, and careful operations. Strong operating system security is not just installing the operating system. It is making sure the system continues to enforce the organization's security expectations over time. For Security Plus questions, look for the role the control plays. If the scenario describes authorizing which mail servers may send for a domain, think SPF. If it describes digitally signing email so the receiver can verify the domain's signature and detect certain message changes, think DKIM. If it describes policy, alignment, reporting, quarantine, or rejection based on SPF and DKIM results, think DMARC. If it describes showing a verified brand logo in supported inboxes after strong domain authentication, think BIMI. If it describes centrally enforcing Windows settings across users and computers, think group policy. If it describes mandatory access control, labels, policy enforcement, and limiting Linux process behavior, think SELinux. The terms are very different, but each one becomes easier when you connect it to the problem it is meant to solve. The larger lesson is that trust has to be enforced in both communication and operating systems. Email authentication controls help organizations reduce domain spoofing and make impersonation harder. SPF identifies approved sending sources. DKIM adds a domain-based signature. DMARC turns those checks into reporting and enforcement policy. BIMI adds a visible brand signal when authentication is strong enough. Group policy helps Windows environments apply consistent security settings at scale. SELinux helps Linux systems confine processes through mandatory access control. These controls do not make every message safe or every system invulnerable. They reduce common weaknesses by making trust more explicit and enforcement more consistent. When you see them in an exam scenario, ask what needs to be verified, what needs to be enforced, and where the control operates.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.